Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Soul Sense podcast here at Samaritan's Well. Today we have another special guest. His name is Dustin Kleinschmidt, and he is an author, a coach, and a former pastor with over 25 years of ministry experience. Recently published, just in the last few months, a really interesting book that I'm really excited to cover called The Wilderness Way, Finding Freedom in Life's Fractures. And that, he says, is a book for people caught between the life they expected and the life they're actually living. And I think that's a really important topic. So we were excited to have you on, Dustin. Welcome to the show.
Mark, thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. And yeah, it's good to see another Dallas native or another Dallas person nearby.
That's right. We figured out that I drive through Murphy where you live just about every day. So
I'm going to wave as you go by every morning.
You wave from the Panera and I'll wave to you. Dustin, tell us a little bit about your history and how you got to the place. We understand if you get to a place where you write a book called The Wilderness Way, you must have went through some wilderness. So tell us a little about that. Tell us about your history, Dustin.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a broken home. So my parents, my mom divorced my dad before I was even 2. So then I was going to be born in Germany because my dad was in the military, and my mom flew back from Germany and decided that the relationship was unhealthy. And so it was her and I initially, and then she got into a long-term relationship with a man who was, in essence, functionally my dad up until early middle school. And he was really physically and emotionally abusive to all of us. And so there was a lot of chaos in those early childhood years. I didn't have faith. My mom had grown up Catholic. She used to have a t-shirt that said, "I survived Catholic school." And so faith wasn't really a significant part of our dynamic. And then in early high school, I had a friend who started inviting me to church and inviting me to his youth group. And at first I was like, I've been to a few masses. I'm good. I have no interest in this.
Sure.
But he was smart. He changed tactics and he said, "Hey, a bunch of us are going to Six Flags and I'm dating this girl and she has a friend. And I don't know if you'd be interested." And I was like, well, yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, roller coasters and girls, what else could you want as a 15-year-old?
Right.
So I started going to this youth group and it was really interesting because in that youth group, I ended up finding the friendships that I always had longed for. I had friends, but never kind of the depth of friendship and really more so even a family. And we had amazing small group leaders who discipled us well and honestly and strongly, but at the same time, very lovingly. Our boys' small group met at 6:30 a.m. on Mondays in the morning. And our small group leader, Steve, would be like, "Hey guys, I'll be here. Door will be open. If you don't show up, I'll just do my quiet times and go to the office." And we would, a bunch of knuckleheaded 15 and 16-year-olds would drag ourselves in there and we'd talk about Jesus, talk about struggling with lust. And I mean, it was raw and honest. And at the time, I didn't realize how formative it was. But they really became significant parts of my spiritual journey. So I just dove in. I've never been a good observer of things. So as soon as I started, as soon as I gave my life to Jesus and then started going to the youth group, it was like, I want to do something. And so it was like, "Hey, do you want to help mix sound? Okay. Do you want to shoot videos? Okay, I can try and figure that out." So I was always just kind of active behind the scenes and being a part of the ministry as much as I could. And slowly but surely that led into opportunities for internships when I kind of transitioned out of high school and into early college. I had bought a guitar because girls like guys who play guitar. And again, there's a pattern here you might find. The joke is I knew 4 chords and our college pastor knew 3 chords. So that made me the worship guy. And I just started leading worship and learning how to play guitar as I was leading worship. And it was frumpy and clunky and all that kind of stuff. But it kept developing over time. I got better and better. Started writing songs kind of on a dare. They turned out to not be horrible. And then I ended up pursuing, I was working part-time at the church as an intern in our student ministries, as well as doing some tech stuff. and then ended up pursuing a career in the music business for like 7 years. Grew up in Los Angeles, so that was kind of the thing, and ended up with a production deal and wrote songs and tried to become a rock star and did all those things. And I was on stage in a club in Hollywood called the Coconut Teaser. And yes, a real place. And it was almost as if, I mean, it was as close to audible as I think God could be without being audible. And it was this sense of like, okay, you're done with this.
Okay.
And I remember going home to my roommate that night or the next day and talking with him. And he was the student ministries pastor. He and I were roommates. And I just said, hey, I think I'm done with the rock star thing. And he was like, that's really interesting. He's like, I've been wanting to hire a full-time student ministries worship pastor at our church, which is a pretty large church in LA. And so we pitched it to the elders and they hired me full-time. And I started a worship academy, which was really about training young people in how to play music and how to lead worship, but then also a theology of worship, and just dove headfirst into ministry. You know, having not been vocationally, other than like internships, never really had been in ministry, didn't plan on it, wasn't strategizing how to be a pastor or any of that stuff, just kind of tripped and fell backwards into it and was deeply invested in by some really quality people. So I did that until the economy changed in 2008-9. By then I'm married. We've got a couple boys. We bought a house. My wife's a full-time nurse. Like we were entrenched.
Sure.
And with the housing bubble bursting, my position got cut. And so then it was just this kind of a year and a half of what do we do? Where do we go? And the Lord opened a door to church in Rockwall, Texas, where I became I started out as worship / discipleship hybrid because I had a lot of experience leading small groups and things like that. And we handed off worship. And then I did discipleship for 7 years in that church, and had pretty quickly realized there was some unhealthy leadership things in that church, but didn't really know how to articulate it or what it was. And really in many ways, so if you know Enneagram, and I'm an Enneagram 8. And so I can be, I like to challenge. I'm kind of instinctively contrarian. My heart is to help, but I'm sure I can be annoying being that guy in the room going, hey, I don't know if that's going to work, or, hey, what about this? And so it created some clashes with me and the lead pastor. Ultimately, they sent us to plant a church in Murphy, where we live now. And we launched in 2017 and started to kind of build and grow, and just a slow kind of development, meeting in a middle school, setting up and tearing down, all the fun things that you do when you church plant. Right. And then the COVID hit. And through the course of COVID, really started wrestling with, did we want to leverage our people to basically start over again and make them do what they'd already done for 2.5 years? And ultimately decided as a leadership team, it was just going to be healthier to not start over. And in the midst of that, the church I'd come from in LA, or in Rockwall, that senior pastor had resigned. It had come out that he had been having an affair. It really decimated that church culture. That church had grown significantly. I mean, about a built a building, all those kinds of things. And in my conversations with them, just kind of over the course of our transition, they said, hey, would you come back and help lead this church? Which I prayed through with my wife. We knew it was going to be messy. We knew it was going to be hard, but ultimately felt like God was leading us to go back to it. And so we went back, and the joke I say is, I don't think my key card swiped the door once before just all heck broke loose. And it makes sense. You have a lot of people who are very hurt, and a lot of people who feel like they've been betrayed, and there's a lack of trust. There's a bunch of staff people who are kind of like, who are you? Are you just here to take over? Are you just going to be like the last guy? And in the midst of that, financially, the church is struggling because, a good chunk of the church left when everything came down. And then on top of that, you have fractures. Former elder takes a group of people and goes and plants a church, and it's just all of the things. And, I really believe that God had called us back there. And so it was head down, work hard, try and love well, try and be clear, rebuild an elder team, all those kinds of things. And I ultimately I was in an elder meeting on a Saturday in October of 2023 and was being told by a couple of young leaders how bad our leadership was and how they didn't understand why we couldn't get things going better. and that ultimately they didn't want to follow us anymore. And I was, ready to throw hands, but I didn't. But we left that meeting, and some of the other elders kind of acquiesced in a weird way. And I remembered leaving, and in my heart, I'm going, okay, so my choice is either I fire these guys and then I have to deal with the fallout of that in a church that's already gone through a ton of transition, or I walk away. And I called my wife and just said, I don't see a way forward for me. I just can't keep having these fights. And, within a week I had submitted my resignation and resigned at the end of the year. I knew that I could step away graciously and just kind of put a good face on it and walk away. And then took a deep breath and thought, okay, cool. Now I can figure out what God has for me in this next season, and I'm going to get relief. And I didn't. Within a month or two, I had my first anxiety attack that I'd ever had in my life, while we were visiting another church, and spiraled into depression. I had started seeing a counselor when I started having the anxiety attacks, who's been really good. I still see him to this day.
Oh, good.
And, but we started kind of digging into my childhood, and you just started to kind of unpack things. And I had been through counselors before, but this was just, and in that, just a deep, deep, dark space. Ended up, and I talk about it in the book, that on my 50th birthday, or just before my 50th birthday, my wife said, "Hey, do you want to have a party or anything?" And I said, honestly, I don't know that I want to be here anymore. And I'd never been in that space in my life. It was so disorienting. And in that, the book came out of, because God began to just kind of challenge some assumptions and this, what I describe as a quid pro quo that I had with him that I didn't even realize, which was, it's one thing when you do something wrong and you pay a consequence for it. Like, I sinned and then I got in trouble for it and this thing happened. Right. You can kind of reconcile that. I was sitting there going, wait a minute, I did what you told me to. We had long discussions, Lord, about how hard this was going to be and how painful it could be and what it was going to disrupt in our family. And I did it anyways. I took the bullet. I went back to the church. And in essence, in my heart, I was saying it should have worked out. We should have found a way to stick the landing. And it was very much a what the heck, God, kind of conversations that I was having. And he was loving and gracious. And basically what I sensed from him was, you're doing a great job articulating your disappointments to me, but are you looking at your expectations? Because every disappointment is built on an unmet expectation.
Yeah.
And that really was like I had this quid pro quo with him, that because I did what he told me to, it was all going to work out. And simultaneously in that, had been reading through the Exodus narrative and had been kind of studying it. And, you've got Israel rescued from slavery in Egypt and then told about a promised land, but then they spend 40 years in the wilderness. And I, as a follower of Jesus, have been rescued from slavery to sin and death. And one day he will wipe away every tear from every eye, and there will be no more pain and no more sorrow. God's home will be among his people. But in between is a wilderness. And this life is the wilderness. And it's going to always be this weird mix of both beauty and brokenness at the same time. And you're going to have great days and hard days, and sometimes in the same day. And that was this amazing reframe. And it wasn't a fatalistic thing of like life stinks and then you die, but it was like, oh, I shouldn't be so surprised when bad things happen or when hard things go on. And it really became this thing as I began to work through it and it ultimately wrote the book. It freed me. It freed me in so many ways just to be present and not work so hard to try and fix the problems that are in front of me necessarily. Not try and bypass them either and just paint a verse on them and just, everything's fine and God works all things to the good and just, but to be able to learn how to lament, for myself and with others, to be present, to be Job's friends before they started talking and to just sit there and listen and then allow God to work in those moments. What I realized is I had spent years, whenever wilderness times or hard seasons came up, my primary fixation is either what did I do wrong or how do I get out of this? And so all of my energy was going to what did I do wrong and how do I get out of this versus where might God be in the middle of this? And what would it look like to faithfully walk with him through it? And that just radically transformed me and my spiritual journey and how I love and lead others, and goodness gracious, everything.
Wow. Okay, that was an incredible overview, Dustin. You told us some of the signs that something inside you was beginning to break down. The
Mm-hmm.
depression, the anxiety, the panic attacks. Those are two very broad, significant ones. Other signs that something might beginning to erode for you personally or for other people?
Yeah, it's interesting because I tend to be very hyper vigilant. So when we went back to the church, I was very careful to like I had a coach, I had a counselor, I had good conversations with the elders. I was going to protect my heart. I wasn't going to go or end up where the other guy went, like all those things. So it wasn't like I was almost hyper aware of those things.
Okay.
And and the word you used is exactly right. Erode is there weren't any singular moments. It was like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Okay.
So what I started to see is, like, for example, I remember teaching on a topic that created some conflict with people within the church, where some people disagreed with how I framed something, or they had a different theological viewpoint or whatever. So then I'm trying to navigate that, and you're trying to be loving and still kind of say, like, I don't think I'm wrong in this. And so
Yep.
there's this back and forth that's going on, and some of it's petty, and I didn't have a ton of patience for that. And so I'm frustrated. And what ended up happening is I found myself over time starting to kind of try and craft myself to meet what that expectation is from that group, or what this expectation is from this group, or what the elders needed to be me to be in this moment, or what those two staff people needed, or how do I help that family that's mad at me because we had to let go of one of our children's directors? I found myself being tugged in all these different directions, and it began to, like, what used to be clear about my sense of direction, relationship to the Lord, how I was called and designed to lead and love, all that began to kind of stretch out and then become fuzzier. And I remember a specific moment being on the platform and I was teaching, and I knew in the moment, I was like, I could teach this way. I could say it this way and I won't get emails. If I say it this way, which is the way I intend to say it, I might get emails. And so as soon as I started doing that mental math all the time,
Yes.
I started to realize that there was things that were fracturing inside. And I was up front with the elders, all the way through. We had a process in place where one of them would contact my wife once a month and just check in with her as well. Just because it would be easy for me to say, how you doing? I'm fine,
Sure.
but she'll be honest with them.
Right.
And so I remember at one point, one of the elders was talking to her and said, hey, how long do you think he can keep up this pace of kind of pulling the wagon up the hill? And she said, I give it about 12 months. And she was pretty much right on the nose.
Whoa.
Like, we knew, like, I could feel it building. I think there's the optimistic side of me was going like, no, we can push through. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out until we couldn't. I think she was probably more in tune to the fact that it wasn't going to land on its feet. So it was all those little erosions that I saw that really, that became kind of the cumulative effect that led to that moment where I just said, okay, I can't have another fight. The way I told the church in my resignation, I said, I've spent the last 3 years fighting for you, and I can no longer fight with you. I just can't. And again, Enneagram 8, like, I love a good fight.
Sure.
But I was so fatigued and so burned out that, like, even the next couple of months, I told my wife, Stacy, I said, I don't even want to drive. Like, I don't want to make any decisions. You're going to drive.
I've seen so many people get to that place, and it's almost like the fatigue goes down to your bones, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I've had clients where they come in and I get that sense that I could almost puff, just a little puff, and it would knock them off their feet, because your foundation is just, it's not there, is it? I
Mhm.
mean, tell us a little more about those first few months, because that was really the wilderness.
Yeah, it was one of my counselors once said this, and it was actually really telling. He said, why we were talking about something happening, and he said, why did you have $100 response to a $10 problem? And I was like, that's actually a really good thought. He goes,
It's a
when you
good
have a
thought.
$100 response to a $10 problem, there's something going on underneath all that. And so those first few months, again, it was $100 responses to everything. I
Yeah.
was short with my family. I had no energy to do anything or to be anything. I still had all of the anxiety of like, how are we going to pay the bills? What am I going to do? Like, I'm, my late 40s at the time. Like, am I going to start a new career? I've only ever done ministry. I have a degree in ministry that's useless in the business world. Like, so all of that stuff's going on. So I'm having those kind of existential thought processes. But like I said earlier, I really was expecting a measure of relief. And instead, it did spiral. And the first kind of telltale sign was we went to visit a church on a Sunday because we're like, okay, we love Jesus still. We still love his church. And so there wasn't this deconstruction of all that kind of stuff. It was like, okay, we want to plug in, we want to get in community. And I was probably fishing for some opportunities. I did the whole get my resume ready and send it out and all that kind of stuff. But we're at this church and we happened to bump into someone that we met who had known someone from the church we had come from, like just adjacent relationships. Sure. And it just triggered an internal like shortness of breath. And like, I remember looking at Stacy and as we were walking to the car and I said, I got to call somebody, and literally reached out to the counselor I have now, who had been a friend of mine had told me about him, and just texted him and said, hey, I need to talk. And so we connected that afternoon. And then as he and I started to dive into kind of my childhood, again, me being me, anything worth doing is worth overdoing. We're, walking through childhood and all those things. And I think in my heart and mind, I'm going, okay, I'm going to figure this out so I can fix it. And so I'm, life mapping the snot out of everything and doing the deep dive. But what was happening is because I wasn't allowing myself just to experience and grieve, I was trying to push through and fix it so that I could get to the other side, so that I could get back into ministry or get a career or whatever it would be. And that actually ended up being the worst spiral into that deep depression. And I remember sitting in my counselor's office and he looked at me and he goes, okay, we're calling time out. Yeah. He's like, we need to get you on some medication. Yeah. And we need to stop doing this deep dive. Yeah. We've gone off the rails. Yeah. And so that was kind of that, okay, like I just need to be okay to sit in this. And so he told me, you're on a sabbatical. He's like, okay, we're doing a sabbatical. We're going to take 3 months. You're just going to kind of exist. Good for him. Let God do what God's going to do, which for me was really challenging because I'm like, but I have bills and we have he's like, and not long after that, I was just spending some time in prayer, and it was like God said, okay, you serve and you trust me to provide. And I remember saying to him, well, that's a stupid idea. I don't think that's a good idea at all. And, but that anchored me, and it, lo and behold, like a couple weeks later, I get a call from a friend saying, hey man, I could use some help with this. Could you do that? Or, and again, some ministry stuff, but nothing where I had to be fully invested. It was like, hey, we need a guest speaker at this little church. Sure. Could you do that? Sure. Yeah. I'd love to do that. Right. Sure. It pays $50. Okay, cool. Like, I don't care.
There you go.
And so that was like the beginning of this like healing process of me resetting in many ways. And in that, I started journaling, and the wilderness thing was really a deep part of the journaling, and going, okay, life is a wilderness. How have I misread this? And those journals started to form into notes. And I remember typing things out and sending it to my wife, like, hey, this is really crazy. Like, God's really teaching me some cool things. And then her reading it. And it just kind of slowly morphed into a book. It wasn't like, again, like kind of like with ministry, I didn't set out going, I'm going to go write a book.
Sure.
It was like these journals, and my compulsion is when I'm learning something, I want to share it. It's just kind of how I am. And so it was like, God, I want to share this with people. And so I did. I just started writing articles and sending them to friends and putting them on a website that no one ever read and like all those things. And then at some point it kind of was like, hey, I think I've got enough here to really do a deep dive into and write it out of the book. And so I kind of went back and made it like, I'm intentionally going to go see if this goes somewhere. And yeah, it took about 7 months to really dig in and write it. And that journey itself was so revealing to my heart and taught me so much about myself and about where I was at and what it looked like to follow Jesus in the wilderness and who God is, like who we see, how we see the heart and character of God while we're walking through the wilderness.
Dustin, I mean, that's beautiful testimony. You know, we get this concept, everything that can be shaken will be shaken. And I tell my clients, I said, really a test. We want to look at these tests as a positive either way. The test could reveal to us that, okay, that's something that kind of passed the test and we can move on with some kind of some reliance on that. It's like I tell people if a friend of mine, made a chair for me and he said, I guarantee that'll carry 250 pounds. Well, let's test it. And here's the 250 pounds. And sure enough, it stands the test. Then we have some confidence there. But if it doesn't pass the test, it just means we need some attention, right?
Yes.
Because what do? I think as a people, and particularly, I think, ministers can get caught up in that, counselors, all Christians can get caught up in it. But we have this tendency to say, if I'm not thinking about it, if it's kind of buried in the right way, it's not necessarily affecting me. And, one of my sayings is, it's okay to bury things. We just don't bury things alive. And it seems like when we talk about expectations, when we talk about the way that you approached, your Christian walk, everything that could be shaken was shaken. And there for a matter of a year or two, I mean, it was a pretty devastating place. We talked about the 3-month sabbatical. What was that like? And then how did you come out of it? And how did you get to a place where basically we got to 2025 and you're actually putting together the manuscript for this book? Tell us a little about that journey between the sabbatical and, putting the book together.
Yeah. I would say that if the erosion in ministry was death by 1,000 paper cuts, the healing process was healing by 1,000 small Band-Aids, right? It was literally moment by moment and, exploring those things. But again, learning, I'm not to go into it to try and fix it, but to be just curious about myself, curious, in so many ways, like just a posture of curiosity, a posture of being present, learning to say things to myself and to God and to my family, maybe that I think, like you were talking about the suppression. I think like a good example would be like, okay, my wife does something like, cause we're two humans living in a house and she does something that annoys me, but I know that it's really not about her. I'm annoyed and I'm being annoying because I'm annoyed. Like I don't need to be annoyed. And so she'll notice it and say, well, what's wrong? And I'll be like, nothing's wrong. Because I know I'm the problem, not her. And so rather than saying I'm annoyed, I would just say, no, I'm fine.
Sure.
What I learned to do, and this is with her and across the board, was, hey, what you did really made me mad. It's not your fault. I shouldn't be mad. I know that, but that's actually just what I'm feeling. And so I'm experiencing being frustrated, even though I know better and I know it's not your fault. It's my fault, but I'm just going to say that. And for her to go like, okay, like she knows she doesn't have to try and change it or fix it or apologize or anything. It's on me. And so much of what I really started to dive into was this idea that, like God wears big boy pants. God is not afraid of me coming to him with my whole frustration. And, he's not offended when I say, hey, what the heck? Like, I feel like this is unfair. I'm not saying it is unfair. I'm not saying that you're not doing a good job as God. I'm articulating what I'm feeling. And as someone who grew up in a traumatic environment where feelings were always, it was the, hey, don't you dare
Yeah.
cry. Right.
Yeah.
So it's taken me a good 45 plus years to learn how to allow feelings to exist and not just stifle them and not look for a way of solving them. And so a lot of that time was me learning how to do that in an environment that had very little external pressure in it. So again, by then, I had gotten a part-time position with a friend of mine's company, just helping with some project management, like nothing forward facing. I could be behind the scenes. Again, God just providing in very simple ways, but leaving me the margin in my schedule to not feel like I had to go, whole hog 40 hours a week or find a new career. Like I could just be. And he was gracious enough and they needed me, and I'm gifted in some of those strategic areas. So it just worked out. And it was a low emotional and mental lift so that it wasn't like it had to consume me. And that was another thing I was learning. Can I participate in something and not feel like it has to consume me?
Oh,
which is a whole nother thing that ministry.
That's a whole nother thing.
A whole nother thing. Cause anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And so I've never not bled for something I've been a part of. And so now it was like, okay, I can contribute to this and I can get to a point where I have healthy boundaries and go, yeah, I'm sorry, but your crisis isn't my crisis. Like I did the best I could. You're going to have to figure that out.
Sure.
And I remember multiple times saying, wow, that sounds like a you problem and I had never done that before. And so it was all of those, it's all these little Band-Aids that God was teaching me how to re-regulate myself and explore, real woundedness and, learning that I got anxious avoidance in the attachment style lottery. Right. And so
yes,
that knowing that I have that simultaneous, I'm not enough and I'm too much at the same time, and beginning to learn how to be like, I remember sitting in my counselor's office one day and we're talking and he just looks at me and goes, you don't like yourself very much, do you?
Ooh.
And I remember going like, wait, yeah, you're kind of right. Like, yeah, like,
okay, you got me.
Exactly. And so, okay. So like, let's just be there. It's not where I want to be, but it is where I am.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so let's, and then going home to my wife and going, oh my gosh, my counselor just showed me that I don't really like myself. And she's like, yeah, I can see that. And then, hey, what do you see about me? And so, right. So it was just this really slow unfolding of those things. And in that, the book was a beautiful thing that God gave me. I really believe it was a gift, not only just so that I could share it with others, but it was so much part of that healing because it gave me a place to synthesize these things that I was wrestling with and write them down and save them, and have them, whether the book ever got published or not. It was like, I just wanted to get this stuff down. So it was a really beautiful 2 years of just kind of discovering, and rediscovering. And ironically, in it, like I said, that God had said, clearly you serve and trust me to provide. And then for a long time, I would say over 12 months, he was relatively quiet, if not feeling distant. Which was an interesting experience of like, okay, I'm doing my quiet times. I want the bells and whistles of my time with him. And yet I'm not, like, it's just, okay, I'm just being faithful. I'm just quietly being faithful.
There's something that you were kind of talking about there, but you alluded to it earlier in the podcast. And perhaps I've seen it most eloquently written in the full serenity prayer, not just the small part of it that we're used to, but the phrase is taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it to be. There's something profound about that. If we can begin to move towards, because I think so much, when we talk about expectations, so much is, well, it should be this way, it should be that way. And we can live in those expectations and kind of keep reality, at arm's length. And it
Mm-hmm.
turns out that God really invites us into reality, and he says, I will meet you there, son. I will meet you there, daughter. But
Yes.
you do have to have the courage to move into it. Dustin, would you mind sharing? I know you work with burnout ministry leaders now. What are some of the things that you see that the leaders often miss until it becomes a crisis? Some of those slow erosions. You've talked about some of them, but now that you're working with people, in that place, what are some
Mm-hmm.
of the things you see? Some of the things you try to look for and help bring into the light? Obviously, we're trying to avoid the total meltdown or the total blow
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that uh, as you know, in your vocation and ministry, there's always a thing under the thing.
Yep.
Like whatever the thing is, there's a thing underneath that thing.
Yeah, there
and
is.
and so a lot of what I'm doing with guys is an expedition to try and help them see the thing under the thing.
Okay.
And again, discovery is way better than dictation. So I could just look at a guy and go like, "Hey, man, this is what I think's going on." But there's something about letting the spirit work in people and go on that journey. What I see a lot of is different forms of what I would call bypassing. Or
Okay.
there's a guy named John. I think it's John Wellwood was his name. I talk about him in the book, and I'm blanking exactly, but he coined the phrase spiritual bypassing, which was something he observed in Buddhist communities and how they would separate themselves from anything negative, or they would try to, and just kind of like avoid, basically like they would bypass pain and sorrow, and suffering was the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this spiritually, especially in leaders, but all throughout the Western church, which is this compulsion when we experience hard things, because we're Christians and we know that God does work all things to the good, and one day
Right.
God's home will be among his people. There's a tendency to want to jump to the answer without experiencing where we're at, like you were just saying from the serenity prayer. And so I see a lot of that bypassing where, and I would do it too, where it's like I'm wrestling with this frustration and fear and pain that I'm going through, and out here the academic theologian who learned the Greek and Hebrews going, but you know what Romans 8 says, and you know what this says, and so why are you feeling this way? Because you know that God's in control. You know God loves you. And it became this battle in my own heart of like, I do know that, but I don't feel that. And
No.
the father in Mark is one of my favorite people in all of scripture, where he goes to Jesus and he asks Jesus to heal his son. And he says, if you could, would you heal my son? And Jesus says, if, basically, I'm paraphrasing. And the father says, I believe, but help my unbelief. And that is so, I think that articulates that gap between what we know here and what we're experiencing here. And I see a lot of leaders who have a lot here, but have never really explored their inner life much. Or they're just starting to, right? And it's out of the fact that it's like, hey, there's this incongruence going on that I don't know how to manage, or I don't know how to regulate. And so for my stuff, we look at 4 areas: your emotional health, so your relationship to yourself, your spiritual health, your relationship to God, your relational health. So how are you relating to the world around you, the people who are closest to you, and then your organizational health, which is both how do you order your life as well as how do you lead out of that order. And I've found that we are beautifully complicated and holistic. That I don't think you can be emotionally unhealthy and spiritually healthy. I think that they're too connected.
Yep.
And so that's, so what I'm trying to do with leaders is help them kind of address those things. Like the Pharisees were the smartest theologians in the class, and they missed the creator of all things when he was in their midst. So you can be really spiritually healthy and you can know the answers, but not be attentive to a God who's standing in front of you. And I really want to help guys or leaders think that way and begin to really go, okay, what's going on? What's the thing under the thing? Let's explore that. Let's let's sit in that a little bit and not feel like I have to fix them, but just to sit there with them and go, yeah, that's really hard, my friend. And I'm really sorry.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and a wonderful way to do it. I think about our soul being our mind, will, and emotions. And any three of those areas can become an idol. In other words, too much importance, right?
Yes.
You kind of described someone maybe that idolizes their mind and what they know. And it's almost like we try to exclude the other parts of our soul, much less our spirit man, which is
Mm-hmm.
another, of course, big piece. But I see people that willpower is too important. I see
Mm-hmm.
people where their mind is too important, and then very commonly where the emotions are like children that are locked up in the basement. I tell
Yes.
people that our emotions are like your children. You could let them run the house, which is not a good idea, or God forbid, you can lock them in the basement. That's illegal. We can't
Uh-huh.
do either of those, right?
Yes.
But it's scary. It is scary to begin to let some of that out. You mean I have to let myself cry and let myself grieve? You have to you have to push yourself to do that,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't follow the model of scripture unless you weep,
Yep.
right? And of course,
Absolutely.
what's the scripture? Weep with those who weep. How can I weep with you unless you're weeping? Right?
Mm-hmm.
How can I obey that command if we're suppressing these emotions? Um,
Yeah.
could you talk, Dustin, just for a moment about attachment wounds? We talked about it just briefly, and just attachment wounds and identity struggles, but because it turns out that those are a really a significant things that shape the way people experience God.
Yes. Yeah. I even early on in my Christian faith, I knew that because I had two father figures in my life. My biological father, who was absentee for the most part. We had a
Hmm.
very, very scattered relationship. And then an abusive stepfather with a hair trigger. So I knew going into my faith that the idea of God as father was going to be a challenge. And
Yeah.
I remember even in high school really wrestling and saying, God, like, help me to see you for who you are. And so, at that point, I didn't have language for this anxious avoidant thing.
Right.
But the way I've come to understand that experience is that sensation that I often feel like I'm too much and not enough at the same time. Like
Wow.
I'm too much for the room and I'm not enough. I'm too much for that church and I'm not enough. I'm too much for my family. I'm overwhelming because I'm a big personality. And at the same time, I'm not enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not being enough. I'm not caring enough. I'm not loving enough. I'm not spiritual enough. All those things. And so that back and forth, man, that is exhausting. Especially if your compulsion is to be like Bob the Builder and fix it. Right. And
Right.
so I can fix it. So I have to learn to be enough and not too much. And so there's this constant, like it was an exhausting battle. And one of the things I did as an illustration, is I bought a Rubik's Cube. Remember these?
Uh-huh. Oh,
And
yes.
I keep it on my desk at all times. It's not allowed to be solved. My daughter will come in and she and her friends will solve it. And
That's funny.
I will go back and mess it up. And it's a visual reminder to me that I am not a problem to solve.
Mm.
My life is not a problem to solve. God is not a problem to solve. My wife is not a problem to solve. My kids are not a problem to solve. The world is not a problem to solve. And what it does for me is it reminds me of this thing, man. Yeah, it's going to be messy sometimes.
Yep.
And God is present in the middle of that mess. And I don't have to try to pretend to be anything other than where I'm at. And that doesn't mean that I'm behind or ahead. And, you talk about significance and like identity. One of the things a project I'm working on now around that is this idea of, you look at the Apostle Paul. And so he
Mhm.
said he was he was top of his class in Pharisee school. But then ultimately, becomes a persecutor of Christianity and calls himself the least among the apostles and the worst among sinners. Right. So he's both sides of the spectrum. And yet in 1 Corinthians 15, he gets to a point where he says, by God's grace, I am what I am.
Mm.
And I think that's such a beautiful picture of what healthy identity looks like. it isn't bypassing and saying, well, I used to struggle with that stuff, but I'm okay now.
Sure.
And it's not just painting it that way. It's also not wallowing in, oh, I stink. I can't believe I did that. I'm always going to be like, it's not that either. There's this beautiful holistic space in the middle where I can say, hey, like I've got a lot of scars, some that I gave myself, some that others did to me, but those scars tell the story of Jesus in my life. And if I cover him up, I'm actually robbing Jesus of a beautiful story that he's trying to tell. And by God's grace, I am what I am. I didn't choose to have the family environment I did growing up.
Right.
But I did. And God's working it and doing something in it. And I need to be present in that to allow him to use it.
Oh, that's so good. Dustin, this has been so rich. For listeners who feel exhausted, disillusioned, or just spiritually numb, what's one small step toward healing and honesty they could take today?
Psalm 37, verses 3 and 4. Trust in the Lord, do good, dwell in the land, and befriend faithfulness. I think it's the simplest thing. Memorize it in 20 seconds. So trust in the Lord. He's God, I'm not. Do good. Don't cheat, don't lie, don't steal.
Sure.
Dwell in the land, be where you are, be present where you're at, not where you want to be, and befriend faithfulness, which I love so much. The idea of making faithfulness my best friend. My goal is to be faithful today, whatever that looks like.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. I'm so excited. I'm not excited necessarily that you went through the wilderness and that you're, that you're in it. But then again, it's like, wow. God has been revealing so many things. And I think what you've spoken without necessarily saying it directly is that God has met you with grace and mercy at these places. And that's what we're saying to others. He'll meet you. So everyone, please get the Wilderness Way, Finding Freedom in Life's Fractures. And Dustin, you're also doing coaching, so we want to make sure we have what's the best way to reach you for the coaching, Dustin?
Everything's centered on my website, DustinKleinschmidt.com. It is phonetic. The last name's long, but if you Google search something close, I promise Google will find me. And you can contact me there. You can learn about more resources. All that kind of stuff is there at my site.
Kleinschmidt. There you go. Thank you so much for being on. I'm going to wave at you at that Panera in Murphy, whether you're there or not, okay?
Great, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us on Soul Sense. If something today resonated with you, take a moment, write it down, and reflect on it. And help us reach other people by subscribing, liking, leaving a comment, and sharing. We'll see you next time.